So the story begins in darkness, where we learn to shed light on truth. Then we reveal our story within a story. The first story sparks and wakes in light. Raven stretches the sun above the mountains and passes fire to the forest. At water's edge, seedlings absorb the flames. The forest grows, the roots remember everything before us, mark upon bark. Mother of all creation, we are born. My thesis work was really trying to combine three different stories. One was my own personal story, because I think every person has a story of colonization. Second was to map out one of our Tŝilhqot'in stories, one of our legends. So I used Salmon Boy. And then the third is just that overall context of colonization that's happened to displace almost everyone. And trying to fit myself within those stories, but trying to be hopeful about how we look at our own stories and how they're relevant to us still. My name is Russell Myers-Ross, and I'm from Tŝilhqot'in, and I'm currently the chief of Tŝilhqot'in. I became chief in 2012 after 8 years of harassment from my uncle who pushed me into the position. I was quite reluctant. I was coming out of an Indigenous governance program. I had really no intent on becoming a chief ever. I think it was when I saw my uncle struggling in his final year and just thinking about what I wanted to be able to do with the community and my nation, I ended up putting my name forward. I didn't grow up in the community per se. Like I spent a lot of time visiting, but I never spent more than 2 weeks. I was a bit of an outsider, but I think a lot of people just saw me as a confident person and saw that what I was doing and some of the work against one of the mining companies, Taseko Mines in our area. I was always ashamed of my origin. When it's time, learn the stories, the ones that came before you, those you're attracted to, the ones you live by. So where do I begin? 1862 is sort of the timeline of when smallpox came into the Tsilhqot'in area. So it's a bit of a history, and I always describe it as sort of the origins of the Tsilhqot'in in some ways, because it was such a devastating event, and it came in two different waves, one from the west and one from the east. One account at Benzee or Punsi Lake, there's a loss of about 500 people, and only 2 small young children that survived that. It's hard talking about it because it was genocide, and I think it's hard for people to understand like the level of impact just on grief and loss of everything, from stories to how people practice things on the land, to just an immense loss. And I don't know how best to describe what we've lost in a way, because we've never seen what we've lost. British colony and Hudson's Bay Company were plotting routes to the west coast. However, the Tsilhqot'in occupied the region. The colony was too broke to negotiate treaties, which was the British policy to acquiring access to land. In 1864, when there was a road building crew, we were threatened by smallpox again. And that was sort of the moment where one of the war leaders, Whachell, decided it was time to stop it before it came. Camp of over a dozen, I think only 3 people were left to survive. And the 3, I think, left back to Victoria and I guess told the colony at the time, and then 2 militias were assembled. They moved through the Tŝilhqot'in throughout the summer, trying to track down the war party. This is the first official time that they ever got to meet the Tsilhqot'in, and it was a contingent of the militias at the fort, and then the war party, and also a couple of the Tsilhqot'in that were leaders that were more neutral. At night they were shackled, and then the next day they were brought by horse and chains to Quesnel. And then from there, it was a long period of a trial. It was sort of predetermined that it was going to be a hanging. And in October 26, 1864, 5 people lose their lives. For Tsilhqot'in today, it marks our celebration that we're still alive, having gone through not only the smallpox, but the fight to protect our territory and people. It was a big shift, I think, and not only from the population loss of the smallpox to sort of the shift in legal structure and how the colony was going to deal with Indigenous people. When the reserve was created, there was probably only 24 people, I believe, registered to my community. Today, it's almost 450 people. But you could just imagine sort of the devastation of what was left afterwards, and sort of community and nation trying to rekindle itself after smallpox. And I think afterwards there was a huge influence from both the church and the state in developing the Indian Act. I think the Indian Act impacted our community for the most part. I think the idea was meant to have everyone in one location so that the rest of the land could be used by the Crown, and our community and nation would continue to use the land and resist some of those laws. But, over time, there was an impact, and there was punishment or people that decided to move off of the reserve or to sort of continue their lifestyle. And there was rewards for those that stayed and had more confined life, I guess, on the reserve, and ensuring that they get their social assistance and stuff like that, and creating that dependency of staying on the reserve. And the effect was that you'd lose your skills as an Indigenous person to be on the land and to have the land provide for you. We're working with essentially how to get ourselves out of the Indian Act, but in some ways we don't have the structure like the coastal groups do with their parle ceremonies or their winter ceremonies. We're developing from scratch, and we're sort of trying to find ways to sort of dismantle that Indian Act and tribal council concept, and try to figure out ways that we can still hold our core values, but that we're trying new things to sort of get outside of what we're sort of used to. The Tsilhqot'in are unique in different ways, but one is, I think when we talk about governance, the thing that comes up most is our laws of the land, which we call the Tsilhqot'in. And those are our relationships with the animals and the stories that are part of it. So it consumes me. It tries to drown me, our mind, and imprison us. Displaced, our bodies were shaped with the transformation in the land. Quiet and toxic, I wonder if fish and I will return to poisoned rivers. The salmon struggle from birth, but year after year they return. So for a number of years, the Tsilhqot'in Nation has had sort of a relationship with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and it's created sort of a monitoring program and a few sites along the Tsilhqot'in River. And that's just to monitoring the catch of salmon and other species. So it's only been in this past 2 years where we've actually received a bit more financial support to develop a greater fisheries vision for the Tsilhqot'in. For us, it's a positive direction because we're trying to take the lead on everything we can, because we always describe the importance of the fish in our diets and our everyday life. We prepare the fish and salmon for winters, and then it's also critical just for us to keep teaching the young people. This last year was actually one of the first years where we actually caught enough fish to have for our school. And it seems quite minor, but it's a big thing to have our own fish and our own foods. And to dig myself out, I kept being immersed into a world I could never identify with. In the eyes of authorities, there was no room to be Tsilhqot'in or Indigenous. If only I had the strength to sing, then maybe I could speak my truth. I think the intent was really just to inspire other youth that were going through sort of a similar process, or trying to figure out who they were, or trying to figure out how they can deal with that contradiction of living in kind of this colonial society when many of their stories, in my opinion, are quite valued and relevant for today. You realize that governance is an internal thing. Like it's something that's shared. You have to think about it. You have to understand it for yourself and how to apply it to the land or the things that you relate to. The way I try to define governance is, at one end, I'm having to deal with the Indian Act and being a chief. And I think you sort of look at governance as being more that you're sort of the final decision maker and that you're working with processes that you try to be fair and try to be inclusive and make sure that everyone is able to participate. But relating it back to the way Indigenous people see governance is just about the relationship, often with the land and with people. So it's based on respect. And even the story of Salmon Boy is a story of how a boy becomes respectful to the fish and to the salmon because he ends up becoming a salmon and seeing the salmon's perspective. Yeah, I think it's a sort of a lifelong process, I guess, in trying to develop understanding of governance. And it's something that's a little bit more difficult than just trying to read a textbook or trying to look at a legal framework. That's the biggest piece of the nation building thing, is just reflectively moving along, trying new things, and then trying to keep your core values as you move along. But it's a challenge because we don't exactly know until you actually do it and try something new. Led by stories that came before me, the ones I follow, the ones I inherit, betray, the search to understand. For too long, I've been confused by colonialism while searching for the words I belong to, the places that shape me, the person I want to become. Let me unravel my story.